Good morning to everybody out here in California. This is Ryan Thurman with Contact Center Compliance. I've got Eric Troutman with Squire Boggs and Patton, as well as David Shekel and William Shekel with Oxford Biometrics. We're going to be talking about the rise of the automated TCPA lawsuits and just kind of TCPA settlement demands in general. We're going to give you some solutions to take away and have some discussion about what you can do. If you're seeing these, you may have already seen the do-it-yourself lawsuit kits coming across your desk. A lot of them start to look repetitive. We specialize in helping companies stay clear of professional litigators and from being entrapped by these individuals by offering a litigator scrub solution that helps cut down on the kind of tier one filers. But this is a whole new class of people we're dealing with that might not otherwise sue, that are really enticed by the idea of making free, easy money. And we're going to talk about some strategies to deal with that. We've got about a half hour to start with Eric Troutman, and his blog is very worth following if you need to kind of keep updated along with our own sources as far as TCPA cases. And privileged to have him here today talk about if you see in these and what to do with these cases and just kind of what's going on with TCPA. And I promise we'll try not to mention anything about what's going on in the rest of the world and try to stay focused on TCPA today. And hopefully everybody will get a copy of the slides when we're done, and we'll also post up the recording. So don't worry about taking notes or anything like that. We'll get this out to everybody when we're done. Just a quick disclaimer, none of what we're going to talk about today can be used or is to be a substitute for legal advice. So if you need legal advice, talk to Eric or engage competent counsel. This is really just to help guide you in the right direction. David and Will talk about solutions towards the end. They've been partner and also helped us support some of our summits in terms of offering some consent and fraud mitigation. So you might want to stick around for that as well. And we're going to kind of keep this pretty casual today, so feel free to ask questions on the GoToMat chat function so that we can try to get to those and as we have time. And like I said, I'm going to kick it over to Eric because he's the one on the clock first.
So Ryan, I did not agree that we weren't going to talk about what's going on in the rest of the world, because it's the end of the world as we know it. And we're sitting here having a webinar talking about TCPA apps. It's just so much fun, like the way life kind of works sometimes. So as I sit here talking to you guys, the Dow Jones is down like 3,500 points, and the world is on the verge of collapse, seemingly. We all know it's going to end up being okay, but it's just interesting the way kind of the focus of the entire universe can kind of shift from one thing to the next. And it's strange to think that just like 3 weeks ago, the Robocall epidemic was the biggest epidemic out there. And now, of course, we're dealing with a completely different epidemic. But once this resolves, and it undoubtedly will, we will be right back to focusing on the Robocall epidemic and what has become, as I've alluded to here on this screen, the biggest litigation cash cow in American history. I don't know if you folks realize this, but the TCPA is literally the statute that has produced more millionaire plaintiffs lawyers than any other statute, more than asbestos litigation, more than any specific other kinds of litigation out there. This is the single statute that has made more multi-million-dollar settlements than anything else in the nation's history. And that's not surprising because, of course, the statute has a $500 minimum statutory violation for a phone call, up to $1,500, of course, if the call is placed willfully. There is a private right of action with uncapped statutory damages, and there can be billions of dollars in exposure in these cases. These are very challenging cases to defend. They're amongst the most complex of complex litigation. When you're talking about a class, not when you're talking about individual suits, of course, it's actually one of the most uniquely extreme areas of law as well, where on the one hand, the class litigation is about as complicated and nuanced as you're ever going to see. And then the individual cases sometimes are beyond silly. We're going to talk about that here in a few minutes. But the fact that the statute has remained so difficult to apply and has had such staying power in terms of the large number of cases that get filed each year, it really holds a special place in American jurisprudence in terms of, again, the massive risk that the statute creates. I don't have the power to move slides, Ryan, so if you can move to the next slide. And so it's important to keep in mind that the folks listening to this probably realize that there's been some positive developments around the TCPA recently. We know, for instance, that the ATDS definition, the automated telephone dialing system definition, is starting to kind of get narrowed back. Circuit courts of appeal in the 7th Circuit and the 11th Circuit have looked at it and said, no, the statute only applies to randomly dialed calls. There's a huge First Amendment dimension to the TCPA, and this is up in front of the Supreme Court right now. And there's a good likelihood that the Supreme Court is going to do something pretty meaningful and impactful in terms of trimming down the application of the statute. And there's been really good rulings on whether or not you have standing to sue under the TCPA just because you receive a phone call. All of that is very positive, but the important thing is that we can't take our eye off the TCPA ball. It's tempting to say, oh, the courts are finally coming around, common sense is finally coming to TCPA world, but TCPA world remains a chaotic place. And that is most emphasized by the fact that Congress has doubled down and confirmed that the TCPA is the federal response to the robocall epidemic. There is no other response. There's no other statute. There's nothing else that Congress is proposing. It is the TCPA and just the TCPA. So when you have that in mind, you have to realize that the courts and the FCC are under tremendous pressure to abide by Congress's wishes and to keep the TCPA on the books and enforceable, and to a degree pretty broad. So as we see positive developments, we have to remember that there continues to be risk, and the TRACE Act absolutely confirms that the TCPA is critical to the federal response to robocalls. And of course, the regulators now, and I know it's a little far afield of what we're talking about in this session, but the regulators are being invited to the enforcement table because of the TRACE Act, and you're going to start seeing actions, and you already are seeing actions by the DOJ and the CFPB and others in this space. So it's something that needs to be taken extremely seriously. Next slide. But really what drives us here to get together today is a very unique phenomenon, something that is, I think, uniquely American, which is that people just love to sue in this country, and they love to get money, and they have absolutely no qualms, it turns out, filing ridiculous lawsuits, and in fact, even inventing lawsuits merely to try to collect some money from you for making phone calls to them. And of course, this is, I think, best exemplified by the classic case of Stoops versus Wells Fargo, where, of course, my team shut down a massive, what I would consider to be a scam, manufactured lawsuits by a lady who had purchased over 80 cell phones and made sure to get area codes in the Florida area. At the time, of course, Florida was going through a big economic depression, and she was literally just trying to net wrong number phone calls intended from debt collectors to previous owners of the phone numbers. And she was just shaking down these folks, filing TCPA suits and making tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars until, of course, a company, Wells Fargo, who's a great company, did the right thing and retained us to make sure that we shut that scam down. But unfortunately, although we were successful in that case, I mean, the legacy of that decision has not been, frankly, what we would like it to be, because manufactured lawsuits continue and continue and continue, and you've got repeat players that have filed hundreds of cases and engage in some pretty naughty behavior. You hear folks that have fake businesses that are essentially just there to net business-to-business calls from folks that are not maybe as tight as they should be with some of their marketing practices, for instance, just to sue them under the TCPA. And unfortunately, the courts have by and large let these individuals get away with that. The Stoops case, of course, was a fantastic piece of precedent, and if it is used properly, it should shut down many of these cases. But unfortunately, many of the defense lawyers in this space really don't fully grasp the issues, frankly, around prudential standing and haven't necessarily used that case the way that they should. And so as a result, there is a large number of these cases that continue to come in, and courts are abiding by them and allowing these cases to really take a huge chunk out of legitimate American businesses and their bottom line. And to make things worse, and this is really why we're all getting together here today, is to be aware of a new phenomenon, something that is just gross. I mean, it's beyond icky. If you take kind of human greed and you take ingenuity and you put them together, you generally will get some of the worst behavior in the lexicon of humanity. And this is what we're dealing with here. Next slide. That was my tee up for an app, literally an app that encourages people not to pay. You can get the app, and the website is do not pay. What is it? donotpay.com. donotpay.com. And this is incredible the way this thing works. Okay. So first, let's tee up though that it's novel, but it's not entirely novel. The idea of a call blocking app that generates lawsuits has actually been around for a long time. It's not quite a tale as old as time, but it is a tale as old as spam blocking apps. First Orion was a company that brought this out a while ago, and there were some other apps that were related to First Orion that were doing some pretty unscrupulous things. Let's just put it that way. You'd have a situation where you get a phone call, and an app would prompt you to say, for instance, would you like to make a claim, or would you like to say stop, or would you like to make a complaint? And people would say sure, thinking that they're sending a message directly back to the caller, but really what they were doing was sending a message to a lawyer's office, and then somebody from that office would text and say, hey, would you like to file a lawsuit? And that's actually illegal in many states. And we had a case down in Florida, which is one of the states where it is illegal. And we were able to shut down that scam, what I would consider to be a scam, because you've got folks that are being referred cases without any disclosure to the consumer that by hitting the button on the app, they'd be contacting a lawyer, and that they'd be contacted by a lawyer. And ironically, the lawyer would contact them by text message, which might in and of itself be a TCPA violation, but set that aside. So we've been dealing with call blocking apps that generate lawsuits for a while. But this last one, and this is why I was so interested to kind of do this webinar with you, Ryan, that this new one is just so pernicious, because at least in the old way, at least there's a lawyer there still. At least they have to go through an attorney. This new app, and it's so gross the way it works. Let's talk through it. I know my co-panelists here are going to kind of break it down for you even further here in a second. But literally, this app has a phony credit card. Okay, you sign up for the app, and if you get a phone call, right, you're supposed to kind of keep these folks on the line, and rather than provide your credit card information, you provide what's essentially a phony credit card that the app provides for you. The reason that you have this phony credit card is so that when the merchant, the caller, whoever it is, or the collector, if it's a servicing call, goes to try to process a payment, the card will automatically decline, because of course it's a phony card to begin with, but the card subscriber, which is the app, will have the contact information for the merchant that tried to run the card. Okay, so in my opinion, I mean, this smells and looks and tastes a lot like fraud to me. And there might be kind of elements of like a RICO issue, since you've got a third party that's kind of facilitating the fraud. There's an aiding and abetting component and plenty of knowledge and the use of wire. But set all that aside, I'm not a RICO lawyer. The point is, this is gross. It's just gross. But it's also pretty effective, because of course, if you're not on the lookout for this sort of thing, you are going to think this is legitimate. Oh yeah, I got a sale. Oh great, he's going to make a payment on his debt. Fantastic. You run the new credit card, right, that you think is going to be legitimate. And oh wait, it gets declined. And in addition to getting declined, what happens? Well, this app auto-generates, it looks like, it starts with a demand letter. Instant auto-generation of a demand letter with the push of a button. And it's not clear to me that this consumer ever even gets to really see what the content of this letter is. It just gets populated and sent. So you've got essentially a zombie demand getting floated out there, and the app promises to prepare court filings for you as well. Now, it's not clear to me that the app will actually allow you to file those documents, so it looks like there is going to have to be some sort of additional action by the consumer to actually initiate the lawsuit. But the documents all get prepared, and the demand letter goes off with the push of a button, which is it just flat remarkable. Next slide. And as my colleagues here will point out here in a second and talk with you a little bit more about, this is just the first one. There is a number of others. And go ahead, David, were you going to chime in?
It's Will, and yeah, and that's the interesting thing about this. This is the first shot across the bow in this new wave. You know, Do Not Pay was first to market. They were not the first to market in their original line of business, which was being an app that fights parking tickets. But there are a lot of apps that fight parking tickets, and we've been looking closely at some of their bigger national competitors, and it looks like Winit is going to come out with this next. And if it's not them, next, there are going to be soon multiple apps along these lines are going to come out, because quite frankly, people don't like to be called unnecessarily, and they don't know the difference between a scam from wherever and the local insurance guy chasing down actual leads, and all they know is, I don't want this, and an app makes it so easy to just pull the trigger on a lawsuit when a lawsuit might not very well be warranted. And so that's the big thing, I think, certainly in all our worlds right now, is these TCPA violations were by and large targeting the big guys. Now everything can come out, it's peer-to-peer lawsuits. It's app generated, one-on-one. I don't like you, I'm angry, you called me at the wrong second, whatever it is, I got the app, and click the button and you're sued. Even if there's another step in there, you're still in for a rocky road if you're calling any customer, whether it's valid or not.
Yeah, and let's not give these folks too much credit. This is Eric jumping back in here. I mean, you're assuming they didn't want the call. I mean, these guys are intentionally downloading an app with the capacity, I mean, think about that, right? The capacity to randomly and sequentially generate lawsuits is essentially what they've done. And they've intentionally put this onto their phone, and they did it because they want to use it. They're not doing it because they don't want calls. They're doing it because they do want calls. They want to generate lawsuits. That's why they've downloaded the app. Yeah, so when they're sitting there, right, it's not that they don't want the call, it's that they want free money. And that is what is animating this. And so I think, to me, the big question, in terms of what's going to come out of this new wave of, as you put it, peer-to-peer lawsuits, which I think is pretty interesting. I kind of like that concept. Is, do the consumers, are they in for a penny, in for a pound, right? Do they have the guts, the chutzpah to see this stuff through, or are they just kind of like paper tigers? They're brave enough to download this app and to push the button and send off the original demand letter, but when they get punched in the nose, when the business writes back or gets a lawyer or sends back that letter, are they just going to go into a cave somewhere and never come back out? Right? That's to me, that's the big issue. Is in how, if at all, can we tell the difference between a robo app demand letter, and I think we need to get templates of these things. I think we need to share this information as we get it. And how do we tell the difference between these folks who are presumably going to be kind of zombie claimants, folks that aren't really going to see their cases through, probably, but I could be wrong, versus, of course, the repeat players and the Diana Mays of the world, who are extremely, extremely dangerous. But so that brings us, of course, to our next topic, which is, how do we avoid these things to begin with? And I've got some thoughts, but Will and David, why don't I let you folks go first?
Then Ryan, can you go to the next slide, please?
It should be good there.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll just we'll break through these first then. I know you guys have some different thoughts in terms of like analytics and whatnot. But so when you're thinking through, right, let's say you're a in-house counsel at a company that makes calls, either origination calls or servicing calls or whatever. And you start seeing a large volume of template demand letters, right? That's probably going to be an indicator that, either someone's using a kit, and of course there's several of those out there already, but it could be one of these 15,000 demand letters that have already been generated by this app. And what is important in my mind is making sure that you're going to have a strategy. Is the strategy going to be, employing some sort of a robo response, which I think David's going to talk about here in a second? Is your strategy going to be something, a little bit more specific and nuanced, where you're going to be looking at the background facts, potentially retaining counsel, or at least getting on the phone yourself and pushing back and saying, hey, this is garbage? Because remember, right, if you thought that you were getting a large volume of garbage pre-suit demands before, at least then there was a lawyer involved, right? In theory, at least behind many of these. Here, there's no lawyer at all. You've got a robo lawyer. I mean, the guy that manufactures the app literally refers to it as a robo lawyer. It's not a robo lawyer. It's a document production machine. It's just a mill. There's no discretion is being built into this whatsoever. So you're going to see weaker and weaker and weaker claims, weaker claims you've ever seen before. And it's a nuisance. It's a terrible nuisance, and unfortunately, it's something that is going to have to be absorbed as part of any business model. And you can expect, as these things continue to roll out, that you're going to see a higher volume of pre-suit demands, even as the TCPA law gets a little narrower, as we were talking about before. So we definitely have to have a strategy. And this last bullet point here on the slide, to me as a litigator, is particularly important to keep in mind. People can shake you down unfortunately, without all that much consequence. But if they actually file a lawsuit, Rule 11 is very stringent in federal court, and it applies to lawyers and to pro se litigants, right? So if these folks are filing as individuals that don't have lawyers, they are still held to the same standard as lawyers, and they also have to be able to demonstrate that they had a good faith basis for every allegation in that complaint, including that you actually used technology that was governed by the statute and that you made the phone calls without adequate levels of consent. And of course, if you're attending this phone session, this webinar, you care about the TCPA, you care about compliance, and you have good policies and procedures. Otherwise, you wouldn't waste your time listening to this. So the chances are pretty good that these lawsuits that are being generated by this app, again, with no lawyers vetting any of the allegations, are going to be completely bogus. And obviously, you're going to have to kind of gut check what kind of institution you are. Are you the kind of institution that just wants to write checks, small though they might be, to get out of these cases and be done with them? Or are you the kind of institution that wants to be more aggressive? Or are you the kind of institution that wants to be very aggressive and get a reputation for not putting up with garbage like this, and go out and get a couple of motions filed and seek sanctions against some of these people, and put a couple of heads on pikes, as I like to say? Ultimately, that's going to come down to the philosophy and the temperament of the individual defendant, the individual company. But obviously, firms like mine, Squire Patton Boggs, where we've defended well over 1,000 of these things now, we have tailor-made solutions where we can help with whatever you folks need to do. You want to be aggressive? Trust me, there's nobody more aggressive than we are. But if you also want to kind of take the other path and say, hey, look, let's just olive branch this out, get as many of these things resolved for as little money as possible, and just keep this thing kind of moving, we can look into that for you too. The bottom line, though, is that, again, you do have to be strategic. You do have to have some thought in terms of what and who you are, but that there are solutions and remedies to make sure that if you want to be aggressive, there's definitely ways to make sure that these people leave you alone. That's my 2 cents, but I know that there's some other views as well. So, David, we'll dive in.
I think there's definitely that attitude that differs amongst our clients. There's some that they keep a reserve fund to pay these people off. There's others that absolutely they don't cave in on any of this. And part of that is trying to, like you said, figure out who you're dealing with. You're seeing a lot of templates come in. Are the people that are hitting you with these complaints, have they filed this multiple TCPA cases? So we have a way in which our clients can go in and actually reverse into the name or the phone number of the litigant and see what their history is, so they can go see, did they file 10 TCPA cases in the last 2 years? You probably want to go talk to Eric or another TCPA attorney and get that strategy going. If they're a lone wolf, maybe never, done anything before, you might be able to, be like you said, be a paper tiger and push back, and you never hear from again. So I think understanding that threat level, but also is important, but also making sure that your agents are trained, because when they suspect something, they should be able to report it. And there's definitely technology out there that can help with that as well. But having your agents, pick up on this stuff if somebody is really, making those kinds of threats, or once they file the suit, if they're fishing for other information. Typically, a lot of these litigants will ask a lot of questions that are highly unusual, but they're a lot of them are pretty sophisticated, and get an agent talking about the technology they use, dialer or SMS or whatever, not realizing that they're just collecting facts and snooping around.
That's a great point, right? The social engineering aspect, right? And that's hacker language. I mean, these folks that are setting up these lawsuits, and again, we're talking about different breeds, right? You've got the breed of individual that just downloads an app and pushes a button and sits back and hopes to collect some money. But then you've got the other breed of manufactured lawsuit plaintiff, and they are pretty sophisticated. And there ought to be some training with your agents, where people are saying, if your agents are being asked, hey, what kind of technology are you using? Hey, how are these phone calls getting placed? Or the classic presumptive, you guys are using an auto dialer, aren't you? That the agent knows how to respond to those questions without revealing information that they are not required to reveal, and potentially setting up a lawsuit. I cannot tell you how many times I get into one of these suits, and the plaintiff is sitting here in one of these single permission states, and they're recording the call, and the lawyer sends me over a recording with a demand letter that says, we know you're using a dialer because, listen at 45 seconds into this tape, and you'll see the agent say, yeah, we use an auto dialer. I can't stop the calls. It's automatic. Sorry. That sort of stuff really needs to be avoided, especially these days when the ATDS definition is getting carved down. So something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I think avoidance is exactly the key word. For us and for our clients, it's not about the suit; it's about the nuisance. How do you avoid that nuisance in the first place? And that's, I think, why all three of us are on the phone today, and why everybody else is joining us. But imagine you had to handle, like you personally, Eric, had to handle all of these suits from this app. It's just going to become overrun. And if you do the math on the app, it makes sense to become a nuisance. And considering the traction this got in the news, it's almost like the Today Show encouraging you to be a nuisance. I mean, this was all over the place. Imagine you have to pay for the lawyers to fight all the nonsense click of the button litigation that's coming your way. So for us, and what we're going to be talking about, is like, how do you avoid that nuisance? How do you avoid that these problems to begin with? And hopefully we've got some good solutions for people.
All right, well, roll them out. Ryan,
okay,
move the
next slide then.
The ironic thing about a lot of this is people are like, well, why aren't these people just on the do not call list? Is because they want to receive a lot of these calls. They purposely don't list. They get numbers that aren't listed on DNC, and they go in to opt in to sites to go act like a prospect, sign up for services. I mean, if you looked at the vast majority of what we do on the litigating scrub side, the vast majority of those numbers are not on a federal DNC list or a state DNC list. Most of them are numbers that they're wanting the calls and the text, and that's where a lot of the things I hear from my clients are that led them to us is, hey, we do mostly opt-in, TCPA, we get lead gen, but we have somebody that challenged consent, or they set us up and had reassigned phone numbers, yada yada. So you run in that case, which is the issue of the opt-in. How do you make sure that person isn't just trying to game the system? But ultimately, yeah, they probably didn't want, if they really didn't want the call, then that's easy to handle, but they make it so they're generating a lot of that traffic themselves, especially in lead gen, where, if you go like any of these EDU or mortgage lead gen sites, I'm not going to name them because I don't want to throw them under the bus, but you're going to get 30 calls, a bunch of text messages if you go apply for a loan or car insurance or whatever, because they sell that lead over and over, and it's a feeding frenzy when that lead is sold, because it's first to connect and get that deal. So
and I need to drop, Ryan, but let me just take that last piece and tie it to the presentation, the rest of the presentation, because I reviewed the slides, and Will and David over at Oxford, they're geniuses. You guys really know what they're doing. So let me just note though, right, because the biggest trend out there now in the class litigation, we've been talking about these little onesie twosies. I mean, they're actually not onesie twosies, hundreds and 200s now, individual suits, but in the class environment, the biggest trend is suing lead aggregators and lead buyers on the theory that the data underlying the lead is not legitimate, that the lead generator is selling false leads. And I'm not going to pontificate as to why that's not the case or it's not happening, but that is what the biggest trend is in the lawsuits. And listen carefully to the rest of the presentation if you're a lead buyer, because these guys have some solutions that help not only in detecting potential fake lawsuits and fake transactions that lead to lawsuits, but also potentially can detect bot activity that is leading to the creation of fake leads, which is very important for everyone to keep in mind. With that, I'm dropping. Have fun, folks.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Eric.
Hey, thanks for your time.
Yeah, so to pick up right where Eric left off, I mean, this is a real issue that we're seeing with our clients, is bot generated fraud. And that's why when we talk about what your solution absolutely needs to have, you need to be identifying bot fraud, because bots have become so sophisticated and so inexpensive that anybody, honestly, who's mildly tech savvy with a few extra hours can set this up and just cash in. And maybe they're only getting 10, 20, 100,000 bucks. Others are doing this at scale and are defrauding companies by hundreds of millions of dollars by using real data, hacked, stolen data that's available on the dark web relatively inexpensively. I mean, like a PayPal account with login goes for about $1.50 per user. You can get, the Marriott data will cost you, that's 125 million names, addresses, phone numbers, credit cards for about 500 bucks. This isn't expensive. And if you're paying for leads, you may very well be paying for a bot that is savvy at avoiding detection and using real data to populate those lead generation forms. That's why the first step in prevention and getting away from all the nuisance is to be able to identify bot fraud, regardless of how sophisticated it is.
Click fraud. I mean, it's click farms, bots.
Yeah.
Not just bots. There are a lot of click farms out there that are doing the same things.
Yeah, I focus on bots because our CTO wrote an article about how to do it, and it's so fascinating. It's almost you almost get tempted to become a criminal when you see how easy it is. I mean, you wonder why your mother doesn't do it in their spare time. But if you can weed out that fraud at the beginning, that means you're only passing human submissions onto your call center. That improves your ROI, that improves your traction, it lets you scale. This is essential. You're only calling people who with certainty actually requested it, and
it cuts down on your expense because you're not paying for the bad leads.
Yeah, exactly. And a good solution will be able to figure out, if that person's really calling from Zimbabwe, but they say they're in Iowa, this shouldn't be difficult. But most current solutions that do it at the beginning, at the first step, are really just comparing IP address and area code, and that's so easily spoofed. My son's 12 and he can do that. Matter of fact, he does it more than I would like him to. So, but it doesn't take a lot to know how to game your location so that you have access to Netflix shows you otherwise wouldn't. Or, you know, Netflix is cracking down on that, but they had to crack down on it because it was so easy to do. So, and then of course, you know, the last point in terms of what every solution needs to do is make sure that, you know, every interaction is archived, stored, and has a unique identifier so that it can be called up as evidence in case you do get one of these calls, and or you do get hit by one of these attacks from the app saying, hey, you didn't ask. And so, well, if you can prove that they did ask, that will help you. Ryan, you go to the next slide.
And I mean, detecting the bots, I think, is just as important as detecting the litigators, because litigators will do similar types of things in terms of, you know, they're not going to maybe give you their true name because you may have already flagged them in your system. So I've seen and heard from cases against some very well-known litigants where they just start changing their last name by one letter, or changing their date of birth by a couple digits, and they claim it's a typo, and then they go in and either opt into programs or sign up for plans that their only reason for doing so is to induce calls, induce SMS, rack up damages, so they can go either seek damage themselves or, you know, try to get in on a class action and cash out.
Absolutely. You know, there's that old line, no one knows if you're a dog on the internet. You know, it's like, you can be whoever you claim to be when you're filling these things out. And I think that's exactly why, you know, why we partner with you. It's like, you know, we can tell you at the beginning, is it a dog, is it a human? You can tell them later, you know, we caught a dog trying to, you know, who was already inside the gate.
And that's why we're excited about, maybe it's a little early to announce it, but I'm excited about the project we're doing with you for the combination of the litigator scrub and the bot detection program that we'll be able to offer to all of our mutual clients pretty darn soon. You know, we tell everybody between contact center compliance and Oxford Bio, the combination of the two is really all you need to defend yourself, to do best practices, to avoid the potential hassle. And then, I don't know if we've got it on the next slide, but what we were talking about yesterday with our automated defense response, I think that will take out an awful lot of the nuisance factor. Yeah, there's going to be serious ones, and there's going to be, you know, 500 apps that hit one account. But as Will said, with the peer-to-peer and the one-to-one versus the, you know, one-to-many, I mean, you're seeing a reversal in how these lawsuits and threats work. So we're pretty excited about that, and Will talk about that.
Yeah.
I jumped a little ahead.
Before we get to that, I want to show you on the next slide, if you would please move forward. This next slide shows what real proof of consent looks like. Proof of consent is evidence that they actually asked you to call. So this is what you're going to need to hand to your lawyer if you get hit with a TCPA suit, or whether it's through one of these, you know, your robo lawyer or any other thing. If you watch, you can see, sorry, I think, well, should be able to see the
in the deck that goes out afterwards, you'll be able to see what a human looks like, what a bot looks like.
Right.
Oh, here it goes.
There you go.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah, you see this being filled out,
and then the metadata at the end, which is key.
And this is fast typing, but we can say, oh hey, well, that almost looked human, but hey, that was really fast. So this, you can tell by the speed, you can tell by a whole lot of different factors that we have baked in. This is a bot, this is a human. This was our CTO actually typing something in and letting our own contact form track him, so that we can say, hey, we've got evidence that you asked. You're going to have to be able to have this for these TCPA suits that come your way. And what Dave was just talking about is our solution on the next slide that's come up as we've been collaborating really for this event, that we have evidence that that person asked you to call them. they filled out the form. We can demonstrate that it's a human being. You have a video of them filling it out. It's not that difficult to have your own robo lawyer fight back and say, you think you're sending us a cease and desist letter, or you think you're initiating your lawsuit. Well, here we have proof that you asked us to call, and that proof of consent is something you can take to court if it goes that far. So, but if you have to call Eric and say, hey, I'm in over my head and I need a lawyer to take care of all this, that's the evidence he's going to need, and that's what a good solution would offer right away. But this automatic response is the next level for fighting apps like this. And again, I want to reiterate what we said at the top. This is the first. It is not the last. And what's going to happen from now on is the app that people are already using, or the app that's easiest for them to use, is what they're going to end up using to get to you. And for that, we're now developing this solution that just you can press the button right back and fight them with fight fire with fire.
Yeah, there's another problem with apps that are out there right now, but this has to do more on the attempted blocking of suspected robocalls. So you have apps like Mr. Number, No More Robo, that allow you to basically report robocalls, and the problem that's happening with these apps is that it's hurting people's ability to deliver their calls, because the information on that caller ID reputation gets reported back into the call blocking and scam likely that's going on. And so you're ending up with a lot of these calls that you can't get through because the apps have somebody who just has a vendetta against telemarketers, or just doesn't want to pay their debts, and is marking things as scam likely. And so you have this crowdsourcing that's pushing back. So what I've learned out of that mix is a lot of that stuff is unregulated. So even though it's being reported to carriers, no one's policing that information, just like nobody's policing the fact of these robot lawyers, right? And so it's kind of a hot mess. And so we've developed, and I'll talk about a little bit later about dealing with caller ID reputation and checking for that. But right now, that's a big problem, because you'll have people that are especially in lead generation, where they've gotten their TCPA consent. They're making their maybe a second or third attempt at contacting an individual who gave them consent. Most likely, hopefully, it's not a bot and wants to hear about their offer. And all of a sudden, their calls are being blocked by the fact that they're being tagged as a robocaller, so they can't even connect the call. Right now it's kind of like trying to kind of figure things out. And we had actually a couple of interesting questions that came up. One of which was maybe we can just take a little quick pause and we can use these as some discussion points. But one of them was about if the courts are pushing back and having to deal with all of these suits. And I don't think a lot of these suits from the robot lawyers even hitting the courts. These are, I don't know if you guys have actually seen what they provide, but
it's just really demand letters. Like Eric said, I mean, they're putting out demand letters. High 90% would be my estimate. It never goes further than that. It's you know what? We should probably put out that video that Eric shared with us last night when we send out the deck, because it was just a guy that's sitting at home in his bed, hitting the button, trying to collect $500. The more he presses the button, the more mails go out, and maybe he makes a couple $1,000s a week. That's all he's trying to do. He's not going to go to court, and he's not going to fight it. He's going to create a nuisance for every legitimate dialer. And that guy, multiplied by how many downloads does he have yet? He's not even on the
Google Play Store. Yeah, you have to use the mobile site for if you're on Android. But he's got over 3,000 reviews on the Apple App Store,
and he's only been on there a month, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's he's taking over. He's making a big dent, and it's going to be like, Will said, peer-to-peer, a lot of nuisance. Probably not too many lawsuits, but if you're the dialer, you're the guy, the end client, you have to deal with it. So I think we all agree on, as the people on the call, best practices, proof of consent, no fraud, litigator scrub, reassign numbers, all of those, and to your point before, speed to lead is very important. I mean, we were talking last week, I've been using a bunch of different apps for get different work done in the yard and the house, and I get 5, 10 different companies coming back at me. When I'm still on the app, I'll pick up the call 2, 3, 5, maybe even 10 seconds. The next day, I don't know who that is, and I just figure it's spam, and I block it. But if I'm still in the mode of trying to find a guy that's going to clean my gutter, I'm going to pick up that call while I'm on the app, and I'm not going to blacklist it. So, and I do notice that about 75–80% of people that come back to me on these things are the next day or after. And the guys that get the business are the ones that can do the speed to lead. But I think with our solution, your solution, and our proposed joint solution, I think we're still somewhere under 700 milliseconds for the whole thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, especially if you're doing any kind of inbound lead analysis, right? You've got to be able to fit into that daisy chain of equations that a lead buyer typically, or even sometimes a lead seller, is going to put into place. So a lot of times they're going to be doing a check on like a right party ID, which we do for a lot of folks. They'll want to check on, the validity of the lead and the data quality, right? Because you start passing up bots, bad phone numbers, disconnected numbers, fake information. Those aren't good leads, and they don't produce. And if you load those up in a system where your caller ID number has already been flagged as a robocaller, and you're not using our Trust Call product or another way to kind of mitigate that and register your numbers, you're not going to be able to get a hold of, you're not going to be able to get the calls through. And the other thing that's happening is if you have a lot of, the way the carriers are looking at traffic right now, if you have a lot of disconnected numbers, you have a lot of like bad data going through, that also raises your scam likely or your blocking score, because then they figure, oh, you must be, sequentially or randomly generating lists or, buying lists, right? You're not getting actual contact and doing account, maintenance type things. So it's pretty interesting. The one question we had that was, we were talking about the app earlier that was interesting was about what the exact violation that they claim on the do not pay app. And I think it's just basically, hey, you robocalled me, and they assume, it's a dialer. They assume that, hey, you called me and it was, unwanted. So have you guys read into that at all? Is it strictly they're filing under TCPA, under kind of the you call me on a dialer type rule?
It's generic. It's generic TCPA. It's as Eric said, it is a frivolous attempt. Now, for a pure robocaller, the bad guys, and we all agree are bad guys, ones that are trying to fleece us, and I got to fix your computer because the fake Apple support people. We're all united, I think, that those guys are giving everybody else a bad name, and that's what that app is really about. But
well, that's what it's supposed to be about.
Know the difference.
Yeah.
People get a call. It's not my friend Bob. Hit the button. Let's see if I can get $500. And all I'm doing is sending that letter out to say, is the guy on the other side going to pay me? It's worth a shot. I mean, I spend $3 a month for the app. the more times I press the button, I'm getting, it's a free lot, it's a free $500 scratch off. That's it.
Yeah.
So you can hire a lawyer. You're going to win. There's no, I'm not a lawyer, but odds are you're going to win because they requested the call. They, you have their proof of consent, but it becomes a cost thing. I mean, do I offer them $250 or do I send it to my lawyer that charges $350 or in other cases $14.50 an hour? What do I do? And I think that's where the auto-generated response for the auto demand letters, I think that would be pretty effective in knocking off an awful lot of noise, an awful lot of stress, and just hitting back the Robo Revenge with a Robo Defense.
Right.
For people that want to bring it further, you're going to know, like you said, people that go through and say, oh, is this an ATDS? Is this what?
Yeah. So I want to loop back to what we were talking about earlier, because this slide is up, where the reason this app poses such a threat is because you really can do everything right and still get fined for compliance violations. And that's really because, and if you could advance to the next slide, please, that's really because so much accurate data, current data, has been hacked recently, and they just keep coming. Equifax, now it's a couple years old. That data might not be accurate. Marriott, year. Capital One, a little bit more than a year. And every month we read about another major breach. Every month I get emails from one monitoring service or another saying, hey, we found your data somewhere else. And at this point, you can, or you should know, your data is out there. So you might get called by somebody who thinks they have a legitimate lead, but you never ask them to call you. Real data is being used for real people who never asked you to contact them by the bad actors out there. And just to be clear, there is so much incentive to commit fraud right now that that people are doing it, and they are making a lot of money off of committing fraud, because we pay for the traffic, we pay for the leads, we pay all these services in the whole lead gen food chain. And if there's one bad actor in there somewhere, everybody else can be legitimate. You can be an absolute white hat good guy and still get fined because somebody you were relying on wasn't as good as you, because this data makes it so easy to steal. And that's why this app, plus the current state of fraud in lead gen, has created such a toxic environment, like Eric was saying at the top. Ryan, you there?
Yeah.
Did I leave you speechless?
Yeah, I was also reading a couple questions, to be honest, and as we've gotten a little older in my lifetime, multitasking ability has slightly decreased.
Filing a suit.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
I encourage you to become a criminal. I was like, that
I know. Actually, yeah, I was thinking about downloading the Do Not Pay app, and cashing in. I mean, there's that's
working from home. They got time. They'll have more time.
I know.
The boss on the shoulder. They can be.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw this. Eric mentioned earlier. The legal call blocker app was one of the first. Kind of on the litigator side, where one of the big TCPA firms, they basically use it to get reports on numbers and tell people, look, we'll get you, $1,500 a call. Give us your detail, and then then they've already got all kinds of caller information that they can use. And so this isn't like new, but the way in which they're doing it to like you said, sue the local insurance guy, sue people that probably would see one of these demand letters and not know what to do about it, and kind of go into the panic mode. And like you said, I mean, good luck finding a good TCPA attorney that charges less than $1,000 an hour if they can even take your case. Most of them are pretty slam right now with all the class action activity. You've got a lot of stuff going on with reassigned phone numbers, and they're in high demand. So the more you can do to kind of beat these people down, and also kind of share information, and that's kind of like how also kind of we take into account some of these folks on the litigation side is by sharing the information. So people can submit litigator numbers and names to us. Obviously, we're going to vet them out a little bit, but that's partly how we're able to kind of crowdsource and keep track of these people. So I've seen a big uptick in some of those additions, mostly from what Eric was talking about, the do-it-yourself kit, the robocalls.cash type people who basically for whatever, $70, you can go get a kit to do it yourself type thing, where you're seeing a lot of these demand letters where these people are just they're lone wolves off the grid, and they might only sue once or twice, but once a litigator, once they get a little taste of that easy money, why not? And plus, like you said, there are more people going to be working from home or isolated in their community, so they may want to make some extra cash to buy their toilet paper on Amazon. Who knows?
Or I'm thinking the way things are going with the schools right now. Are you seeing? Must be seeing an uptick in the education sector, right, Ryan? I mean,
well, we do a lot of work with folks that generate leads in that business, and I mean, I think that now you're seeing a lot of these universities just going straight virtual, right? Or trying to get set up where the whole campus is emptied out. So it's going to be pretty interesting. But I mean, it's crazy because like 2 months ago, TCPA was the first thing on anybody's list of concerns in the contact center collection lead gen space. Now we're just all worried about, okay, hey, what's your pandemic plan? And, do you have the ability to work virtually? And that's one thing where the contact center world, I think, is a little bit more adept than, your traditional, some of your clients out there, because a lot of this stuff is already set up with technology run virtually. So I think one thing that, we're pretty good at figuring out solutions out there, and there's a lot of technology that can help, but the TCPA nuisance factor right now is pretty high. And especially in that lead gen space where it's like you're getting consent, typically they're getting that language, they've had it vetted out from their attorney, you've got proof of consent, but people want to argue. That's the most common argument is, I never gave you that consent, it wasn't me. I don't subscribe to that kind of stuff. And it's like, like you guys were showing, it's like, how many times do you want to watch the video where you're consenting?
yeah, it's not just to be clear, it's not just the video. The video, it looks nice and all that, but it's really about the metadata behind it. We collect a lot of data about what's happening on that device and about that device as that form is being filled out. And that's really what is going to get you to win in court. It's, we can prove it's the box. And if it's something really bad and they end up having to subpoena the box, we can prove that that was the box. And I think that's really what makes us different, where other people can prove it's an IP address, and we all know that's just not of any value.
Right. And the federal and multiple federal court decisions in the United States have actually determined over the past several years, this isn't new, that an IP address is insufficient to prove anything one way or another. So if it's insufficient evidence, you need better evidence if you're going to win your case. And that's why that metadata is so important. I mean, the visual of saying, here, look, this is you, we captured it, is,
Powerful.
Yeah, absolutely, it's powerful. Then when you get into the next level data, it's like, here's here's everything your device told us, and we can see the CPU, you can see its exact location, not just its spoofed location. You can tell where it is, you can tell what it is. Is it a server masquerading as an iPhone? I mean, that's a typical scammer trick. because they can do it at scale. Set everything up on a powerful computer, let it run. Looks like an iPhone to a
Yeah, the iPhone and Google phone, Android phone simulators are huge.
yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it really ties into the problem where if your call is hitting the consumer and it says scam likely, there's probably a higher likelihood they may want to enact their Robocaller app or just not take the call. And that's really where the CallerID issues have come out. Where right now there's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason behind the way the carriers are treating this, and they don't offer a lot of insight in terms of what they're trying to do, because everything that they do to try to prevent the illegal robocalls and fraud calls, the fraudsters have already one step ahead of them, meaning that they're hacking into PBXs.
Yeah, I can talk for an hour on that one. I was on. That's another webinar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, dealing with this kind of scoring that we do on your phone numbers, and basically giving you that insight and figuring that strategy, figure out what's going on, figure out how to whitelist your numbers. That definitely is, it's a good hour-long conversation. I mean, definitely anybody that's on the call that's concerned about that issue, we can give them kind of a health check. It's kind of like email marketing, right? Email providers keep a spam score on you. It's basically what the carriers are doing right now. And the issue is that you have multiple carriers that don't share data. You got multiple analytics companies. You got bad crowdsourced data. These apps that are all feeding into it, and you have legitimate calls, and it's percolated down the lead gen side, where you got somebody there that wants your information, but you can't even call them from your normal contact center. You got to literally take a cell phone number of one of your reps to call them to get around the call blocking, because they've already flagged your DID number or your 800 number. For various reasons, bad crowdsourced data, abnormal traffic, who knows? So, I mean, and then it's not just the labeling, it's the blocking, because a lot of the carriers will block the number and throw you back a busy signal, bad phone number, or they'll play a fake human back to you that acts like they can't hear you. So it's hard to detect these things. It messes up your data and can generally ruin a campaign. Same thing with one of these litigators that sneaks in. I mean, we did a study on the one client that had run into one of these guys that kept changing his name, and I think we had blocked his number just on this one customer like 40 times in like 3 months. He kept trying to go in, we kept blocking him out. These guys come back, and like Eric said, they find a weak point. They find a company that pays out, they're probably going to keep on knocking. But if you're one of these companies that, I think he said put heads on spikes, heads on pikes. I was watching a lot of Vikings lately, so that resonated to me. But it's true, yeah. If you show you're one of these companies that's not willing to pay, they're looking for an easy paycheck. So keeping them out of your ecosystem is a good idea. And I think the misconception about doing scrubbing is it's strictly for outbound, where predominantly actually we're doing a lot more, like we were talking about on doing a joint solution, is scrubbing on inbound, on that inbound lead gen. Before that person can get in there and get all the calls and generate the damages, you can ID them, you can ID the threat level, and figure out what you want to do with that contact, and then get the clean traffic running in your contact center, get your deliverability up, and get back to the good part of this business, was actually connecting with people and getting them on the phone, getting them engaged, and all the different omni-channel tools you can use. And then you got to worry about, later down the line on lead gen, if the number is reassigned, that's coming down this year. So we'll probably do another webinar just on reassigned phone numbers once the government gets their act together with releasing that. I think they're more interested in releasing a vaccine, which would be great. But the reassigned phone numbers, it's a bigger problem now because people don't hold on to their phone numbers like they used to. So a lot more churn in that department. And so picking up on those reassigned phone numbers, especially on age leads, definitely a big concern. So we'll do like typically for a client, a health check on their caller ID numbers. We'll do a kind of proof of concept on Litigator to kind of isolate and tell you how many litigators you might have on a past campaign. So you kind of see what might be lurking, and then reassign, we can kind of give you what your average reassign rate would be. And then when we get in and start looking at more of the fraud detection, that's where right party checking, reassigned, and tapping into the Oxford's expertise in that area is going to be pretty interesting. And we're hoping to get out there and go to some of these conferences and talk to folks on the road, but we maybe end up doing webinars here in the near future. So stay tuned for future dates. But yeah, everything's kind of up in the air right now. And I think the good thing about TCPA is there is a lot of things you can solve for and put into place. Whereas if you look at some of these other statutes, like here in California with CCPA, it's still unclear, what you can really do to protect yourself. At least with TCPA, you can at least build your defenses and put in some technology that can help you deal with this kind of issues. And I think the other thing,
at the end of the day, if you can prove that Joe requested that call, and you're 100% certain that that was Joe on Joe's device, you really, you won.
Yeah. And the thing is, not only can you put up, fortifications for yourself when it comes to TCPA, the way the technology works, it costs you more if you don't. You actually end up doing a net savings because, even if you go with very conservative numbers in terms of consequences, if you don't have these fortifications in place, you still end up saving in really right away. You see the data, you can steer your campaigns, you can get rid of your worst performing affiliates. We have clients who don't pay for a lead at all, like not just pushing it off until, trying to settle up things later.
They won't accept the lead. You pay out real time. You don't accept the bad lead. If it's on litigator scrub, if it's a bot, if it's out of zone, whatever the parameters are, don't accept it. You don't pay for it.
Right. So this isn't
happens sub-second.
Yeah.
That lead goes somewhere else.
So this isn't a theoretical, in the long run, it saves you money. It starts saving you money right away. It costs you more to not have something like this.
Not that this last half hour hasn't been a self-centered pitch to make it a little even more. We are releasing a new, look at the drop off on attendees when I said that. We are releasing a new website sometime later today, and today or tomorrow we'll be releasing our savings calculator, and you can plug in what you're paying per lead, and with average, what our average fraud things are, and over the coming weeks we're going to plug it in with what you guys are doing, Ryan, and you'll see that the joint, the combination of using contact center compliance and OxBio saves you. So all of a sudden now your compliance effort becomes a net positive before you get into a TCPA litigation argument. Pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I mean it's crazy. If you just looked at the sheer amount that a company would have to pay out for some of these TCPA suits, I mean you're in the tens of thousands of dollars on an individual case. You get in a class action, you're talking hundreds of thousands or potentially millions. And I mean even the ones that are like engineered, like yeah.
No, it's worth every penny. No, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, you got that going on, but I mean I think the being aware part is something where, hey, if we all know this is going on, we can start to look at this and see where the trends are, come up with some solutions. But I don't believe that they've really filed, 10,000 lawsuits, and then those, kind of those numbers seem a little inflated. But the fact that they've already got so many, people that are willing to, use their fake credit card.
10 or 15,000 demand letters, different than a lawsuit, just to be clear.
Yeah.
I think very few of those demand letters translate to a suit. but it's a good scare tactic, and people pay out on them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we're winding down on time here, but I will let everybody know we will send the slides out, link to recording, along with everybody's contact information, so we can get that going. And like I said, stay tuned for future webinars. I think we're going to be doing quite a bit more of these this year. We'll try to keep them educational, bring out some thought leadership, and solutions that people might want to take a look at. And we're also interested in how other people are dealing with some of these kind of copycat lawsuit filers. But it's America. I think it's only going to continue, and until they clean up the definition of what actually a dialer is, everybody's at risk, because that they just assume that whatever you have is going to be so expensive to ID it is not a dialer, that they've kind of backed a company into a corner a little bit. So
yeah, and I just want to say, thanks one to Eric. I know I had to jump, but there's a reason why he's the guy in TCPA, and to see his take on these apps and where we're going, I think is important. And then hopefully, we all collectively can help all of you on the phone avoid that problem to begin with. You don't want to have to end up with Eric, but it's good to know he's there for when you need him. And in the meantime, ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure. So thanks, Ryan.
yeah, thanks, Will and David, and maybe we'll see you guys, everybody that's on the phone here, on a future webinar, or hopefully when the apocalypse ends out here, we can actually get out and meet people again face to face.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.